This is Bloomberg Businessweek. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news. The Bloomberg Businessweek podcast with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec from Bloomberg Radio.
Just looking at our most read on the Bloomberg, we are doing a daily update, if you will, on the Israel-Hamas conflict.
That's always at the top of the most read.
It always is, yeah. Right? And Israel's defense minister telling the U.S. to brace for a, quote, long war against Hamas. As Secretary of State Antony Blinken returned to Israel for further talks amid a global push to prevent the conflict from spreading. President Joe Biden is also considering a visit. So we keep hearing all of this from our news team as well, but that seems to be among the latest.
I think it's really notable what Mike Regan said a few moments ago about all of the diplomacy going on behind the scenes and, you know, not just behind the scenes, but in front of everyone right now with Blinken back there, trying to prevent this from spreading into something bigger.
All right, so let's talk about that, because that's something Tim and I have talked about a lot since this conflict broke out with us, and so appreciative to have back with us Major General Mastin Robeson, Geopolitical Intelligence Geopolitical Intelligence Advisor to the Academy Securities Advisory Board. He's on Zoom from Greenville, South Carolina. The general served about 34 years on active duty in the U.S. Marine Corps. He served in more than 60 countries, and that includes Liberia, Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan, and he did command at every operational level in the Marine Corps. Major General, thank you so much for being with us. How does what comes next determine so much longer term here?
Thanks, Carol. Tim, great to be with you. Without a doubt, there's going to be an assault. Without a doubt, Israel is going to go after Hamas with every intent of destroying them. That's not going to be easy, because although they have a pretty good intelligence base of what's in Hamas, where the tunnels are, where the buildings are, getting after that without significant collateral damage is going to be really brutal. So I think what we're going to see is they are trying right now their best to set up their options to ensure that they have as many partners and as much latitude as they can. But at the end of the day, the interesting part will be how much will Hamas be able to hold down? How much will Iran or Hezbollah come in to help them?
Well, talk to us about what you believe is happening behind the scenes right now from a diplomatic standpoint, because it seems like the U.S. is doing everything it can to prevent this conflict from spiraling out of control.
I think the U.S. is doing everything they can to ensure. I don't think the U.S. has any illusions that the conflict isn't going to happen. So what they're trying to do is mitigate the side effects and whether it spins right or less. How does this influence our opportunity or our relationship with Russia, with Turkey? How does it influence the Middle East relationship? Where does Saudi stand on this? Is Egypt willing to come on board with the Abraham Accords and be supportive? Or does the Brotherhood start to influence Egypt to take a little more empathetic position towards Hamas? So there's certainly a lot of dynamics here that we're trying to shore those up. Nobody knows what Syria's going to do, what Lebanon's going to do, what Iran's going to do, what Egypt's going to do. But we do know what Israel's going to do. So it's how do we shore up the unknowns, how to create as much stability as possible while you still can. Once the shooting starts, it's really hard to negotiate.
General Robeson, the thing though, I mean, does Israel have a choice to not attack? Not really.
No.
And why? I mean, I understand in terms of the severity of what has happened. But why do they not? For those who might be asking that question.
I think if you consider that Hamas was established in 1987 and grew out of, that last rebellion, it was unsuccessful. They've been in control of Gaza since 2007, whether that was by force or by democratic process. It authorized and empowered them. And the fact that they have taken 50% of their ground force, of their trained jihadists, and put them into the fight. They've never shot 2,500 rockets in a single day before. And without a doubt, planning for this had to have had some outside influence. We just can't confirm yet exactly who that was. If Israel doesn't take a step here, Hamas will see this as a sign of weakness, and all it will do is embolden them to do more. There's no way Hamas steps back from this at this point.
Unfortunately, we've seen many civilians on the Israeli side as well as in Gaza killed already. Major General, how do we prevent more deaths? What does Israel need to do to prevent more deaths?
I think Israel's going to try to be as surgical as they possibly can be, but it's going to be
That's
very
hard
difficult.
in Gaza, where it's one of the most densely populated places in the world.
It is, and it's particularly hard when you don't have bunker busting bombs, which they're hoping we're going to give them. That's a deep dive down to a whole lot of cement to be able to get to it.
When you said that Hamas had to have had some kind of outside assistance, do you not yet rule out that Iran had a role in this, even though intelligence so far, I believe we even heard that from the president, I think on 60 Minutes last night, that so far that there's no signs that Iran has had a hand in assisting Hamas? Do you think the jury's still out on that?
Yes and no. I think for diplomatic reasons, the president is being very wise not to make accusations he can't prove. But I think anybody sitting on the sidelines with any kind of history in this absolutely sees Iran's fingerprints on this, and that they are all over the money they've been flowing into Hamas for the last 5 years. And you consider nothing's really happened in 5 to 7 years. That really is the time that Hamas lulled Israel to sleep, thinking maybe they are legitimately going to put more emphasis on their political influence than on their rebellious and on their desire to destroy Israel. Well, that proved to be untrue. And it was a false sense of security that Israel fell into. That's the reason that they can't afford, with this kind of buildup, just let it go.
What do you think when the world does understand forces that perhaps helped Hamas? What should the reaction be? Because we've seen prolonged war in the region before, and it never ends well.
It will be divisive. I think that those who believe that what Hamas did was unconscionable will side with Israel, and those who believe that the state of the Palestinian nation is also reprehensible. What they have suffered through will support them. So there'll be a division, without a doubt. The question is, where does Saudi land? Where does Egypt land? Where does Qatar land? Where does UAE land in that debate? If they are willing to go, wait a minute, this is a jihadist type movement. This is not the Palestinian people, and we're going to, in essence, either stay neutral or we're going to give at least tacit support to the Abraham Accords, in theory. Then I think that's a whole different set of circumstances if everybody unifies behind Hamas. I don't really see Saudi and Egypt rallying behind Hamas in this. Keep in mind, Saudi is as paranoid and afraid of Iran as anybody else is. So the last thing that I see them doing is creating some kind of partnership with Iran long term.
Do you ultimately see a ceasefire at some point in the near future? And I'm just curious if you think about this in terms of, if you have a specific time frame where you think Israel does what Israel has to do and then things calm down and then people try to figure out the way forward.
Yeah, we generally think of decision cycles in this as, is it effects-based or time-based? And this is definitely an effects-based decision cycle where Israel will say, I'm only going to pause when I think that I've had the initial effects that I want to have. It'll have nothing to do with time. It'll have everything to do with effects.
Well, we always so appreciate your insight and your time once again. So thank you so much for joining us. Major General Mastin Robeson, Geopolitical Intelligence Advisor to the Academy Securities Advisory Board, understands battles, having served over 34 years active duty in the U.S. Marine Corps. But, I was struck by something that our Lisa Beyer writes, Tim, and she says, quote, "The struggle between Arabs and Jews over ownership of the Holy Land dates back more than a century and has given rise to 7 major wars. Of course, the latest broke out October 7th, which is what we are talking about now. So my question is, how do we get this struggle to stop ultimately?
I mean, this has been a defining characteristic of the Middle East during our lifetimes. And the sad part is I don't see how it ends anytime soon.
No. And we appreciate, though, the Major General weighing in. We're going to have another voice with an interesting and unique perspective a little bit later on this conflict.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 3 to 6 Eastern. Listen on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, and the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Hey, we have talked earlier about the latest on the Israeli-Hamas conflict and really the way forward, trying to figure it out and kind of what happens next and how much wider maybe it expands. We have another voice on this, Tim, who comes at it from a few different angles.
Yeah, very pleased to have with us this afternoon Lior Susan, a former Special Forces agent for the Israeli military, also the founder and managing partner of Eclipse Ventures. It's a VC firm that invests in, as they note on their website, quote, entrepreneurs rebuilding the world's physical industries. Lior joins us this afternoon on Zoom from Palo Alto, California. Lior, good to have you with us this afternoon. Just give us your view over the last week as somebody who served as a Special Forces agent in the Israeli military and how you're watching what's going on in Israel and Gaza.
Thank you, folks. Thanks for having me. And first of all, sending my prayers to all of the families that lost their loved ones on both sides. I will start by saying people are talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. They must zoom out. This is not an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We are talking about the Western world fighting against terror. It's not a coincidence that the Hamas opened that terrible terror attacks on Israel exactly 10 days ago, when the Saudis was ready to sign historical peace process with Israel that will change the Middle East. Look what's happening in the Middle East with the Gulf countries, with UAE, with Egypt, with Jordan. There is a prosperity. There is a new way of living next to each other, focusing on building companies, focusing on innovation, focusing on technology. The reason that this war started is someone is feel uncomfortable having peace in the Middle East, and it's connect to China, and it's connect to Russia, and of course, it's connect to Iran.
So it's complicated, as we talked earlier, with someone who fought for the U.S. Marine Corps, has done several duties at a very, very high level. It's complicated because there are so many moving parts, if you will, ultimately. Do you see a way forward that, though, ultimately where, I don't want to say capitalism, but a better economic way for more actually wins out?
There is no any other way around. Israel is not going anywhere and the Palestinian is not going anywhere. We must find a way to live in peace next to each other. And there is zero chance that that's will happening while a radical terror organization like Hamas controlling Gaza, because they say, actually on their foundation, that their mission in the world is to wipe Jews and Israelis from the map. That's the only thing. They believe in death. You cannot do business with people that wants you to die. But from a fundamental point of view, I love the Palestinians and have a lot of Palestinians friends. And we want to live next to each other in peace, focusing on building the next technology that will cure cancer. As someone that served and saw the pain of war, there is nobody more incentive than I to go and fight against those terror organizations to make sure that we can go and focusing on prosperity rather than fighting.
You served in the special forces for the Israeli military. We see many, many people going back to Israel to serve once again, as hundreds of thousands have been called up. Have you been called up? Are you going back?
Unfortunately, I don't have the clearance that it's required anymore to serve for my country, because I live in the United States for more than a decade. All of my friends wants me to be here right now, to focusing and explaining the world that this is not a war between the Israeli and the Palestinian. This is a war between democracy and a radical world, a radical that don't believe in freedom of speech, that don't believe in freedom of religion, and don't believe in prosperity and building businesses. So Unfortunately, I need to serve my country from Palo Alto right now.
So talk to us, though. I thought, Lior, what was interesting, because I do think that many think it is a war between Israel and Hamas. But I think there's a feeling, too, of conflict between Israel and Palestine or Palestinians. You say you work with them. Talk to us about, in your role as a founder of Eclipse Ventures, I'm assuming you're investing in all kinds of businesses. Talk to us a little bit about that relationship that you are having with Palestinians.
Yeah, let me give you a sad story. I have a close friend. His name is Eyal Waldman, and he was the founder of a company called Mellanox that sold in a couple of billions of dollars to NVIDIA. Eyal was the first one to establish an R&D centers in the West Bank as well in Gaza, software engineers to support Mellanox. And trust me, he didn't receive a lot of love from the right wings in Israel by doing that. And he employed thousands of people in the West Bank and Gaza that will do software development for him, because like me, he believed that the only way to fight terror is through business and through friendship. Eyal's daughter was one of those kids that being slaughtered in that music festival 10 days ago. So how ironic is that his daughter that was 23 years old, dancing in a music festival, got slaughtered by Hamas terror, while Eyal is the one that employed thousands of people on the Palestinian side.
There's no words. There's absolutely no words. And I guess what I wonder too is, we think about this a lot, Lior, that we think finding an economic way out of things or capitalism ultimately will prevail and lead it to a better way for everyone. I guess what we're just trying to figure out, that there's been conflict in this region, in this area in particular, for such a long time. So I hear what you say. So how do we get the way forward, especially when you still do have terrorists who are out there like Hamas?
I think it's a great example of me traveling to the UAE 10 times this year and doing amazing business and watching His Highness leadership. It's a great example of how you win terror. But which prosperity there is in Lebanon? Is Hezbollah is there to free the Lebanese? Is Hamas is there to free the Palestinians? Is ISIS is there to free the Syrian people? Is Al-Qaeda was there to free Afghanistan? We all in the Western world needs to fight terror so our kids can have a future. And I want my kids to have a future next to my Palestinians neighbors. There is no any other way around, and I will never stop fighting for it.
Are you worried about a potential ground invasion of Gaza? After all, it's been days since Israel warned people in northern Gaza to move to southern Gaza.
And do you think it's wrong, considering what you just said about Palestinians?
I'm sorry and sad about the situation that is happening there. But you need to understand that Israel is not going to sit aside and let the whole rest of the country having 1,300 kids and women that have been slaughtered in one day and more than 150 people kidnapped, most of them civilians, some of them babies on the age of 3 months. Israel cannot continue have the Hamas sitting in the south part of Israel, shooting rockets when they feel comfortable with. Which prosperity happened in Gaza? Israel is out of Gaza from 2005. Which prosperity? Which startup is being built there? Which infrastructure? Which great innovation is happening there? Nothing can be born when there is a radical terror organization control your country. And unfortunately, more people are going to lose their life, both sides, because of that organization.
Lior, we have to leave it there, but I hope we can come back to you, and I hope we can come back to you at a time that's more peaceful, certainly in the Middle East at this point, in Israel and Gaza specifically. Lior Susan, former Special Forces agent for the Israeli military, founder and managing partner of Eclipse Ventures. They're an investor, and they are investing in entrepreneurs who are rebuilding specifically the world's physical industries. So you can find out more information at their website, but just great to get his perspective, a very unique one, and I think a really important one, joining us from Palo Alto, California. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 3 to 6 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and YouTube. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
All right, Carol, check this out. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the number of people here in the U.S. who spoke a language at home other than English almost tripled between the years 1980 and 2019. So in terms of numbers, it's nearly 70 million people here in the U.S.
Sounds like a lot, but...
Sounds like a lot.
But...
I'm not one of them.
But what if you're like...
You know, I want to learn a new language. Maybe brush up on that Spanish.
Bilingual? You're not bilingual at all?
Not bilingual.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Maybe brush up on that Spanish from the semester abroad. Did you study abroad?
I did not.
Do you speak another language?
No, but I took, I don't know, 8 years, 10 years of Spanish. So if you throw me into a Spanish-speaking country, I can get along.
Oh, cool. Well, maybe you can also
Not
brush
fluent,
up on
though.
some of the online services that are available. There are many out there. Among them are the language learning platform Babbel. We've got with us Julie Hansen. She's U.S. CEO of Babbel. It's a privately held company, and it's a role that she's had since 2017. Julie also, we should note, is the former COO and president at Business Insider. She was there when Axel Springer bought BI in a deal that valued the company for $450 million back in 2015. Julie joins us on Zoom from New York. Julie, good to have you with us this afternoon. How are you?
Good. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Carol. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you with us. Talk to us a little bit about the growth that you've seen on the platform, because I got to tell you, there is no shortage of places where you can go online to learn languages.
True. But we've seen, Babbel was the originator of the category of online language learning some 17 years ago when it was founded in Germany. And we've seen double-digit growth. Growth really boomed during the pandemic, but then it stayed at very elevated double-digit rates ever since, and we've been able to sustain that growth. And part of what drives it is what you said at the top of the program, that multi-language families are growing in this country, but it's also just become something that's somehow more appealing to do in our culture, and we're benefiting from that.
So Julie, wait, help me out here. You said obviously makes sense, right? A boom during the pandemic, right? People are at home. They wanted to learn to knit, learn to make sourdough bread, and learn to speak another language. Like that's what it was about. And stay healthy, no doubt about that, during the pandemic. But you've held on to those levels of growth as well as subscribers. Are you saying that you've maintained those levels and the gains?
Yeah, not quite at the pandemic levels, but we've grown double digit ever since the pandemic. So very strong growth. Babbel is the most sold language learning platform ever. We've sold more than 16 million subscriptions over time. So yeah, I can't tell you all the reasons why, but it just seems like something about the language learning boom during the pandemic validated that as an activity, and people have stayed with it.
I'm curious, like, how does it work? If you become, you sign on and you become a customer of your services, do you become a repeat customer? Is that what often, or is it all about new customer acquisition?
So interesting, actually. In Europe, especially in Germany, we do see quite a bit of repeat purchases, whether people are coming back to a language after a pause, or often they're like learning the next language, which of course is very impressive.
Yeah.
Who are these people?
Who are very strong.
Who are learning so many languages?
Over here in the US, we tend to see that people take a pause and then come back. But language learning is, a long-term activity. You can make progress in a short time period, but you don't become fluent without, a considerable long-term effort. So people know that. And that's actually one of the reasons why lifetime subscription is a very popular option.
Talk to me about the strategy here with Babbel in terms of learning and how Babbel teaches in a way that's different from other platforms. And compare with Duolingo. I know Duolingo's a company, it's publicly traded, it's got a market cap of about $6.9 billion. It went public just a couple of years ago. And that one certainly gets a lot of mind share with especially millennials and Gen Z.
Yep. Definitely different learning approaches. At Babbel, we use a lot of learning science and frankly, a lot of AI embedded in the product. But we do believe that human-led teaching, we have something like 150 didactics experts on staff who've created our courses, that we need to marry their knowledge with technology is basically the essence of what we do. We also believe that you're not going to become perfectly fluent from any app. So that's why we've created other products to support and round out the language learning experience. So it might be we have a bunch of podcasts. I think we're up to 23 different podcasts, but we also have live teacher-led, virtual classes, and those are an important part of, really, we care about learner success. So we believe that to get learners to succeed, you have to combine learning methods. There's scientific research behind that. It's not just our belief. So it's that combination of human and technology, especially AI, but other technologies too, and the idea of creating a whole surround sound of learning experiences.
It's really interesting. How much of your business is B2B, business to business? I'm always curious about, or is a lot of it just individuals who want to learn a language?
Well, the B2B is the fastest growing segment of our business by far. It's the newest compared to the consumer, though, so it's not nearly as big, but growing fast. And those are very interesting use cases. We started that business in Europe. We found, international companies, multinational companies needed help. And then we came to the US, and it took a while for the use case to become clear here. But we believe the growth opportunity is massive in the US based on just migration patterns, because often Babbel is brought in for language teaching in situations where there's workplace safety at risk. We have a very diverse group of clients here, from a bunch of MLB teams. Maybe safety isn't quite the thing there. It's excellence, but down to meat packers, landscapers. Places where language barriers create safety issues, and there's a big opportunity in that.
Talk to me about mobile versus desktop right now. What's the share on mobile?
When I started here, if you can imagine, people actually. There was a lot of desktop usage. That was just 6 years ago. And I thought it was really peculiar, frankly, coming from the US. But now we're a mobile app. There are still some people who use the product on their desktop or maybe their iPad, but it's a mobile world.
What does it typically cost for somebody who wants to subscribe or learn a language?
You can start in the US if you want to just try a 1-month subscription for about $15. If you want to subscribe for the year, more like $90. You can pick up a lifetime subscription for, call it $300. So in that range.
And your biggest market or fastest growing market, is it the US? Just got about 30 seconds left here.
Yes to both. The US was the last one that we found success in. It took a very dedicated approach, but it's now the biggest market, the fastest growing. It's all about learning Mexican Spanish in the US market. But we teach all of our 14 languages, but that's the popular language here.
Really interesting. Thanks for the insight. Really fascinating. Julie Hansen, US CEO of Babbel, and joining us, of course, on Zoom in New York City. If you had to pick a language.
Spanish.
Yeah. Me too.
Absolutely.
Love it. Keep learning it. All right, you are listening and watching Bloomberg Businessweek. This is Bloomberg Radio.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 3 to 6 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and YouTube. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Well, there's a common refrain that if an app is free, Tim, you are the product.
It's certainly been true for years when it comes to meta platforms. It's the company formerly known as Facebook. After all, think about this list of apps they've got. Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Messenger, Threads. They've also got the VR app Horizon Worlds. Carol, I don't think you've spent any time there.
Not yet.
Even though it also sells gaming headsets, smart sunglasses, and business productivity software, advertising still accounts for more than 98% of the company's revenue.
98%, but that model, maybe it could be about to change. Could people start paying for ad-free versions of all of that? We're going to get into that because in the forthcoming issue of Bloomberg Businessweek magazine, which will be on newsstands later this week, already online at bloomberg.com/businessweek, and on the Bloomberg, is a story that gets into this. Columnist Max Chafkin wrote it about Meta's flirtation with ad-free services. He joins us here in our Interactive Broker studio, along with the editor of Businessweek, Joel Weber. So, Joel, lots of things going on. What?
Not just advertising, that 98.4% figure, personalized.
Personalized. Those ads that follow you around.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so
the creepy stuff.
that ad tracking is a hallmark of Max Chafkin's reporting. It's not just Meta. He's also pointed out, Google in the past has had some big numbers like this.
Facebook would not say it was creepy. They would say it's very useful. That as Mark Zuckerberg has said
Facebook
repeatedly,
would.
So there's
that they like that people like personalized advertising. It'd be a huge loss if this went away. But
Raise your hand in the studio if you like personalized advertising.
Sometimes I think
Nobody raised their hand.
Sometimes it's so long
mine's
still.
halfway.
You're halfway.
My favorite is on Amazon where you like buy something and then it's like an ad for the thing that you bought already. It's like, oh, come on.
you want to remember the pair of shoes that you had in your cart the day before.
But Max, walk us through what this experiment looks like and what it really means for Meta here.
Right. So basically, in 2018. The EU passed this thing called GDPR. It's a big, complicated set of privacy rules that essentially require companies to ask for consent before showing personalized ads. And Facebook has been in this kind of long-running battle with European regulators, which kind of reached a culmination this summer with a court ruling that essentially is forcing them to finally go ahead and do this. And the way they want to do it is by offering a paid version of the service with no advertising in Europe. So the EU is sort of asking, hey, if you're going to personalize ads, you got to offer people a way out. Facebook is saying, well, our way out is no ads at all, and we're going to charge you for it. And the amount of money they're talking about charging is relatively high. It's around $20 a month, 19 euros a month, $20 a month, which is probably more than most people are willing to pay. It's more, as we point out in the story, it's more than a lot of gym memberships and mobile phone plans and so on, and certainly more than many other subscriptions like Disney Plus and Netflix that people get a lot of value out of.
I kind of think that people will not opt to pay for the services.
I think that's exactly the plan, and that's
like, would you pay for it? I would like pay to not use it. I'd be like, how much do I have to pay in order to keep me off Instagram?
They should consider that.
They should consider that.
Interesting revenue stream for Meta platforms. So I think the intent basically is that most people will not pay for it. If you look at the statement that they put out there, which is in our story, which essentially says, we still believe in personalized advertising. We just want to work with regulators. You read between the lines, they're basically saying regulators are making us do this. We don't expect anyone to take them up on it. On the other hand, a lot of companies are playing around with this. We've seen, obviously, Elon Musk and Twitter in kind of very loud fashion offer his own subscription service.
You tweet a lot or post a lot. Do you pay for it?
I have not yet paid for X Premium.
Neither have I, and I feel like my tweets are getting lost as a result.
Well, yeah, and
sorry, this is like a totally different topic.
Well, and that's where it gets a little bit complicated because, among other things, Elon Musk has talked about this as a way to see fewer ads, but he's also created all these other enticements, including, basically pay to play. And even so, X Premium is not doing very well, despite the much lower price point. It's about half of that proposed figure that Mark Zuckerberg
which I love.
Facebook are talking about.
If you can't have a cage fight, you just have a cage fight in the marketplace and go, half price or double the price.
Yeah, the App Store is basically the cage fight of social media. Snap is also playing around, as we report in the story, is testing an ad-free version. TikTok has done this. I think part of it is that we don't actually know what the market is. I think there are a lot of people who do not like seeing advertising, obviously. I mean, it's come into play with cable television and other markets.
Absolutely, right.
On the other hand, and this is where the real problem is,
Spotify, it's annoying.
It is such a good business. As Joel's intro pointed out, it's not just as a percentage, it's just like the raw numbers. We're talking about, more than $100 billion a year for Facebook. When you break down a per user basis, if they wanted to do this in the US, they would need to reclaim about $220 per person per year who opts out of this. So, that works out to almost $20 a month.
Yeah.
And when you consider the fact that not everyone would pay that, you'd lose some users, the real price would probably have to be actually a bit higher. So it's a problem that a lot of big established businesses have had when they try to look at different models. It's not all that different from the cord cutting conversation with cable television.
So if this worked, how lucrative could it be? Like what's the math have to kind of work out to where you're obviously going to probably not get everybody to do it. It could actually just be a very small percentage of people who opt into it. But you could have a pretty loyal group of people here who are willing to, pay that annual $240.
Like,
Yeah, and
like
I think
rich people, right?
I think.
I mean,
well, it's not coming to the U.S. At least Meta is signaling that it won't. That this is a Europe only thing. This is a thing they're gonna this has to do with regulation, not with what they think the market wants. And I do think. I mean, I'm sure they would like to have more revenue. There is a problem though if you start eating into this network of personalized advertisements. One of the sources I talked to for this story was saying that essentially that this is a network business. Part of what makes this network valuable is all the people. Right now, Facebook has all this data about you that it collects across the internet and it essentially rents it out to advertisers. If you start pulling people out of that data set arguably becomes less valuable. And you could imagine a situation where advertisers stop feeling like Facebook is a must-stop destination. And the dynamics are a little bit different, but that's what's happened to Twitter. As Elon Musk has offered this new revenue stream, he's had huge difficulties with advertisers. And so I think that the challenge, what Facebook would really like, is to create new revenue streams while also continuing to show personalized advertisements to 3 billion people a year.
I also think, so you're saying you get the cake and eat it too.
That's the goal, yeah.
Right. But maybe things go exceptionally well in Europe and you have, a 3-year experiment and you take all those learnings and roll it into a U.S. that's more favorable by then.
I do think, and this is another point you make in the story, if you look at all that's wrong with social media, things that people actually don't like about it, the fact that it kind of makes us feel enraged, that it throws all this information at us to try to get us to stay engaged, which, like, a lot of these things have to do with with the way they make money. And if they made money in a different way, maybe social media could be a little different. They wouldn't necessarily have to have such a, sort of difficult relationship with news publishers, right? Like, at the moment, Facebook and other social networks are at pains to keep you from reading content off-site, which creates all sorts of issues with misinformation, and it makes publishers mad and so on. If you're just paying them a monthly fee, right, they could just refer you to the best content. If you're paying them a monthly fee, maybe they wouldn't have to, cause you to argue with your aunt, for like several months over like
But I like doing that.
Make you not
Max,
come
it sounds like you have familiarity with this.
Why don't they just? I mean, they can't give away the tracking. Let the ads come through, but get rid of the tracking.
So yeah,
side of it.
privacy
'Cause
advocates
that's what everybody
would.
is crazy
Yeah,
about.
right. There's like a middle ground, and they don't want to do this, which is where they could just change their advertising and make it less personalized, or make it not personalized at all, and just show you contextual ads, which is kind of like how Google works. Google does a lot of personalization now at this point too. But in any case, just change the advertising and continue to show you ads. And then maybe there would be a less expensive sort of middle tier payment, like $5 a month, which
Right.
might be more within reach. Again, the main business that they have is really good. And so it's really a question of, are they going to be forced to do this? Or is there some way where demand is much greater than we expect? And as a result, it's more economical than it would seem at first glance.
If you're a product manager, I think one way you would describe this is that you're going to A/B test in real time, and you're going to have this Europe experiment while the rest of the world does its other way. I'm curious, do we have any indications if this is going to change how the algorithms implement and kind of like work your feeds, right? Because in theory, like a mainstay of what appears in your feed are ads. And if you're suddenly changing that, it would just lead you to believe that maybe the rest of the algorithm might change too.
Well, sure, yeah, and one of the arguments
you're incentivizing a different kind of engagement.
Right? Over the years, people have asked Mark Zuckerberg about this a lot, and what he says, I sort of alluded to this at the beginning, is that at Facebook, at Meta, they see ads as part of the content, just as valuable as your aunt's or your your friends' engagement photos or whatever, which I think. Maybe strains a little bit of credulity. Of course, it's something you might say if you're an advertiser. But yeah, I mean, the experience is going to be really different. We don't know how it's going to look. And one of the reasons we don't know how it's going to look is because right now, Meta is negotiating with European regulators on this. And so they're not really saying much because Europe has not given it, the seal of approval. Basically, again, those little notifications that you see when you go on websites sometimes that say like, do you consent to whatever? Meta has resisted that because I think they're worried that people are going to say, no, I don't consent. It's going to mess up their business. So this is their latest basically effort to get around that. If you're offered a paid version that you opt out, then you're effectively opting in by not paying.
We talk so often about, though, tech, and I feel like the world in general in different areas, that we follow kind of what the EU is doing or the Europeans are doing when it comes to oversight,
or
especially
California.
with technology, or California, like if you get into climate change or something, right? Right.
Same with tech, though, with child privacy laws.
Yeah.
So should we assume that this is coming this way at some point, or
I mean,
it's not like Washington can't choose a speaker or anything and get things done.
It's possible. But over the last decade or so, efforts to really rein in tech have not gone super well.
Yeah.
And there are reasons for that, some of which have to do with the fact that, Facebook is seen by many lawmakers, and Facebook has sort of made an effort to present itself this way as as a national champion. And that, whenever efforts to kind of rein in Meta come up, the counter argument from Mark Zuckerberg is, other social networks, primarily TikTok, this Chinese social network, is not going to follow these rules. And we as a country have to protect our national champions. And that has to some extent worked. I also think, Meta has been very effective at just parrying regulation and confusing things. And the truth is, the last point I'll make is we can all sort of say we don't like Facebook, or we don't like seeing ads on Facebook, but a lot of people love this thing, and hundreds of millions of people use it. And if you said, hey, we're gonna pass this new law and make your social media this thing that you use to talk to your friends, and sure, you make fun of it a lot, we're gonna make that now cost $20 a month, or now cost $10 a month, or now you have to pay any amount of money, people are gonna be mad about that.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily gonna be popular. And
People
so,
really like free stuff.
And so the tech companies, the big tech companies, and Meta in particular, have been really, really good at kind of resisting efforts, even during the Trump presidency, where he was very hostile to Silicon Valley in certain ways, to rein them in. And I'd expect that to continue.
Well, Max,
Well, I'll just
go ahead, Joel.
One more thing. What's the timeline for all of this? Because the EU decision was out over the summer, right? So how does this unfold?
We think it's a matter of months, maybe even sooner. So I would expect to happen before the end of the year. Although if regulators didn't go along with it, I don't know, I suppose it could drag out further. Because basically, the regulators have to say that this is an acceptable way to address the court's ruling. And if they said it wasn't, then, Meta would have to come back and think of something else.
Hey, Max, very briefly, just in the last minute that we have, you make the point that Meta also sells some hardware. And after all, it's called Meta Platforms. Would they like to sell enough Oculus Quest or Meta Quest 3s to offset significantly the portion of revenue they get from advertising?
I don't think that's the business model. I think the business model is to sell these headsets probably at break even, or maybe even a loss. I mean, the division, Reality Labs, which the main thing they do is make these headsets, has lost something like $40 billion over the last couple of years.
I think that's a lot of money for Facebook.
So, I don't think this is necessarily a money-making thing. And when you listen to how Mark Zuckerberg talks about it, it's more about creating a new platform to kind of apply the old business model to. And I think in certain ways, right, that's the genius of this of this metaverse thing, if you really squint and look for it, is that maybe they could take the personalized advertising business, the amazing dominance that Facebook has over certain parts of the smartphone, and bring it to a new computing platform. And if they did that, of course, it'd be an even more valuable company.
Yeah. Where's the decimal point? In their favor. Great story. Bloomberg's Max Chafkin, of course, with Joel Weber. And this story, it will be in the new issue of Businessweek magazine, out on Thursdays, on newsstands, already online, and on the Bloomberg.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no.
Who's gonna drive you home?
Honey, please, I'll do the driving.
Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, just have about 18 minutes left in today's trading session, getting ready to wrap up the Monday trade. We've got stocks, they're up for the day. It's really interesting to see. I don't know.
Okay,
I don't
you're
know
not
that
the
I wanna
only
call,
one.
right? And just
look at yields too.
some calm, if you will, in the markets, despite all the geopolitical stuff.
I can't explain it, but maybe we know someone who can. Cole Smead is CEO and Portfolio Manager at Smead Capital Management. He joins us on Zoom from Phoenix, Arizona. We should note, Carol, the Smead Value Fund's got about $4.5 billion in assets under management. It's outperformed its peers over the past 5 years, returning an average annually more than 11%. This year, the fund, though, is up just about 2%.
Hey, Cole, good to have you back with us. It's an interesting world. First macro, and then we love to talk names with you. But the macro environment, it does feel like there's some calm, certainly on the U.S. equity trade, despite our focus on what's going on in Israel and elsewhere in the world. There's a lot of questions out there on so many different levels. How do you see the macro environment?
Yeah, Carol, I was rewatching for probably the 10th time in my life Gone with the Wind yesterday. It was just kind of one of those things I did on a Sunday. And I actually think Mr. Market's a lot like Scarlett O'Hara. She said, fiddle-dee-dee, all this talk of war is ruining my spring party. That's what equity investors are treating as. It's not that big of a deal. They also are treating what's going on in the bond market with the rise in the 10-year yield and the 30-year yield as though it's really not that big of a deal to them, much like Scarlett did prior to the Civil War breaking out. And that's a lot of danger. It just shows you how the psychology really hasn't woken up to the new world we're in, the post-pandemic world, where obviously things are not a given and cheap money is gone. And so the question, to your point, is when will people rectify those things in their mind? We're just not there yet.
So what do you think of where we are in the S&P 500? Are you saying the S&P 500 and equity investors today are not taking into account how many headwinds we face?
It's a great question, Tim. And since we're of the same kind of cohort, millennial wise, I think about it like this. In our lifetimes, are we going to see as cheap and super easy of money as we had and in just a cute little adorable bear market in stocks of 22%? And that's how you clean up major euphorias in capital markets? No, it never ends like that. It always ends in having to really take the psychology to dire straits where people question whether they want to own stocks again. So, we look at this as kind of like this was just the next part of the bear market. People got really excited about a few companies again and took the S&P higher, while most stocks are doing poorly. And our best guess, again, this is not where we make our money, but our best guess is, in the end, peak to trough, the S&P will probably have to lose at least 30, if not 35% of its market value before you clean up the psychology.
Over what time period?
You just got to do it. In other words, to your point, Tim, we're a little over a year into the bear market, and a 22% decline didn't cause people to change their mind. Ask the question: are we in a new era? Whether we're talking, the geopolitical risks that have now woken up. I mean, to invert that, we know that this, as you guys do, that this benefit that the S&P is getting is a very, very narrow group of stocks. In comparison, the businesses that benefit from what's gone on in Israel in the last week is a lot of oil companies, and yet those are a tiny part of the S&P. So you kind of have to ask the question: who wins, who loses in this new regime? And are investors really pricing in the winners and losers correctly? We don't think so at all.
So you're basically saying, and you expect equities will fall substantially from here, or they need to fall to kind of fully reflect maybe the macro?
Well, I would say when I say equities, I'm talking about the S&P 500. So to your point, Carol, I'm talking about the composition of what it owns. Does that mean all stocks have to do poorly? No, not at all. Just like if you look at the equal weighted or the Russell 2, they're doing much worse than the S&P 500 is from a total return perspective. So it just shows you, the exciting stocks, the big market caps out there, that has to struggle for the S&P to do poorly. And so it's you go out and shoot 5 or 10 stocks out back, and you're going to change the S&P for a long time.
All right, so let's talk about what's in your portfolio. You do have a bunch of energy names. As of the end of August, I was looking at the holdings that we saw. Occidental was in there. ConocoPhillips was in there. I don't see Shell in that list, and we had that stock hitting an intraday high over in London today. Of course, they just bought Pioneer, a massive $60 billion bet on shale. It's a big reminder that fossil fuels, at least from the big integrated oil companies, they're still betting on it that it's going to be around for a while. But why not Shell?
Well, so Shell has been coming out of what I call the European major problem, which is that you wanted to have a lot of fun at the Parisian cocktail parties and, parties in Europe, and selling oil and gas stories is not what the European majors have been interested in. In comparison, we're starting to see like the Exxon Mobil's out there wanting to do their Pioneer deal. So if the majors wake up wanting to do deals, I think we have a very different world in the energy space, because there's a lot of producers that could be acquired for attractive multiples on an all stock deal, like is going on with the Exxon Pioneer deal. So if Shell wants to become a U.S. company like they flirted with in the Financial Times a few months ago, they could be a deal maker at this time. It looks like BP and Total are the less likely ones to do that. But again, I think you have to compare the return on equity. If you look at Shell, it's a mid-teens return on equity story. Mm-hmm. It's trading cheaper than some of the other names among the American majors. But that's because they're also wasting a good amount of money in their renewables. That's why their returns are not 20% return on equity now.
And forgive me, as you said, it was Exxon buying Pioneer, which is what I meant to say. Interesting.
Hey, Cole, let's go from oil to retail, because you're a big, you guys have a big position in Target, down 25% so far this year. You have a market value of hundreds of millions of dollars invested in Target. Give me your thoughts on Target, especially in the wake of what they did with closing stores, what they said was due to shrink.
Yeah, some of that is just what's going on in society. To your point about I'll call it vandalism, I'll call it crime, etc. But I think another thing that has to be said is this got here not by accident, but by also leadership. So, for example, I know with what the culture wars has gone on at Target, there's been talk of what certain groups felt they were hurt by and whatnot. I think you also have to look at the employees though too. So you have all this crime going on in, particularly urban Target centers, and then you add the culture war into where these employees are getting harassed by things that they have no control over. I think it's a big mark against the current management. I'd say Brian Cornell's made a lot of missteps. If you look at some of the culture war stuff that I'm commenting on, you just don't see that talked about with Walmart. So I think they've taken unique risks that have disadvantaged them in this season. At the same time, they benefited so much from COVID that I think some of this is also just, reacting to a more normal environment. They're not selling as many TVs as they did a year or 2 years ago. And those were just big ticket price items for Target. So we look at Target, it's a 25% to 30% return on equity story. Tim, they were earning as much as 40 to 50% return on equity, which just wasn't sustainable. They were over earning in a lot of respects.
All right, going to leave it on that note. Hey, Cole, thank you so much for joining us. Cole Smead, CEO and Portfolio Manager at Smead Capital Management, joining us on Zoom from Phoenix, Arizona.
This is the Bloomberg Businessweek podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live weekday afternoons from 3 to 6 Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.